Hello everyone, welcome to Creepy Time Ghost Story channel, where we bring you real horror stories broadcast every day. Tonight we find ourselves at the edge of New York Harbor, where the hum of the city seems to hold its breath, and the water lies blanketed in a thick, suffocating fog. Street lamps glow as dim halos, painting only fragments of the ferry terminal, while the rest of the world seems swallowed whole by a gray curtain. Thomas, a young man in his late 20s with restless eyes and a backpack slung over one shoulder, shifts from foot to foot as the night deepens around him. The Staten Island ferry looms in the distance like a ghost itself, its horn muffled by the heavy mist. You can almost hear the sea breathing, slow and uneasy, as if warning him away. Of course, you probably won't survive this if you try it yourself. Ferries and fog make for a combination of lost directions, missteps, and sometimes vanished passengers. But Thomas isn't the kind to heed ghost stories, not yet. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And while you're here, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Now, turn down the lights, turn on the fan for some soothing background music, and let's go on our journey tonight. Thomas waits at the terminal gates, and the rules are already pressing against him, though he hasn't learned them yet. The fog feels alive, curling around his shoes, sliding up his arms, sneaking under his jacket. It's not unusual for ferries to run in this weather. Locals have seen worse, but nights like this are when people whisper about the unspoken code. Those who listen return home, those who don't become part of the stories passed along in hushed tones. The ticket booth window slides open with a squeak, startling Thomas. Behind the glass, the clerk looks pale, her features blurred in the haze, as though the fog itself has followed her indoors. She doesn't speak, and Thomas hesitates, wondering whether to say something. He remembers hearing a rumor, half joke, half warning, that on fog-covered nights, the first rule is silence. Say too much before you board, and the fog might answer back. A couple beside him whispers too loudly, laughing nervously about ghost ferries and vanishing passengers. Thomas notices the clerk's lips pressed tight. The couple shrugs it off, but the air around them feels different now, heavier. The man drops his ticket when the glass slides shut, as if the booth itself pushed it away. Thomas pockets his own ticket without a word. He doesn't realize yet that his decision may have saved him. The fog thickens as more passengers gather. The usual chatter of the terminal has dulled. Phones glow in hands, but conversations taper into uneasy silence. A historian once wrote about the 1871 Westfield disaster, when a ferry's boiler exploded at the Staten Island dock. The explosion killed dozens, their names etched forever into New York's history. But some survivors swore they heard whispers just before the blast, a warning too faint to catch, or perhaps an invitation to step away. Thomas has read about it, but tonight the history feels closer than ever. He looks toward the boarding gates, where the shape of the ferry waits. Lights flicker along its deck, too dim to comfort anyone. The fog plays tricks, making shapes out of shadows. A woman in a white hat, a man in uniform, a child clutching a suitcase. But when Thomas blinks, there are only ordinary commuters. Still, something about their stillness feels wrong. A sudden sound cracks through the long, low moan of the ferry horn. It doesn't just vibrate in the air. It shivers through Thomas's chest, deep and mournful, like the voice of something older than ships or cities. He steps toward the gates as the fog shifts around him, and his mind flits to a true story his uncle once told. Years ago, a man named Leonard had boarded on a night just like this. He called his wife as the ferry left the dock, joking about how he couldn't see past his own hand. But when the ferry arrived at Staten Island, Leonard wasn't on it. His phone, however, rang later that night, static on the other end, the faint echo of a ferry horn buried beneath the noise. Do ghosts really exist? Or are such tales just the imagination filling in the gaps of tragedy? Thomas shakes his head, trying to ground himself, but he can't deny the eerie parallel between the legend and his own footsteps tonight. The gates groan open. A crowd surges forward in nervous order, their shoes tapping against wet cement. Thomas feels drawn along, the kind of pull that has nothing to do with choice. He glances behind him, only to see the terminal swallowed completely by fog. There is no going back, only forward onto the ferry and into the rules he hasn't yet learned. Somewhere out on the water, a light glimmers faintly and disappears. Thomas isn't sure if it's another ferry or something else entirely. The ramp clatters beneath Thomas's shoes. As he steps aboard, the iron grating slick with condensation. Each clang echoes like a countdown, marking his arrival into a world suspended between land and sea. The ferry sways gently in its berth, as if it too is reluctant to move forward into the fog. He glances over the rail, but there is nothing to see, only a shifting wall of gray. It feels less like weather and more like a stage curtain, drawn tight to conceal whatever waits beyond. Thomas finds a seat near the middle deck. The benches are half full, occupied by strangers who don't seem to acknowledge one another. Some keep their heads down, faces shadowed by hoods or tilted toward the floor. A few stare out into the misty windows as though searching for shapes only they can see. A sign overhead flickers, reminding passengers to remain seated until docking, but the letters seem distorted, as though they are spelling something else in the corner of his vision. That's when he remembers the second rule: never sit too close to the windows on nights like this. An older man across from him hasn't followed it. He sits right at the edge, leaning forward with both palms pressed against the glass. His breath fogs the pane, though Thomas notices the mist outside doesn't clear when the man wipes it. It's almost as if the fog is pressing back, insistent on its own opacity. The ferry horn sounds again, muffled but impossibly close, and the vessel begins to move. The terminal slips into the mist behind them, swallowed whole. There's no sense of progress, just vibration beneath the soles of their shoes, a hum in the benches, and the unsettling certainty that they are no longer anchored to anything solid. Thomas remembers reading about another fog-drenched night in the 1962nd when the Staten Island ferry collided with a tanker. Visibility was so poor that the two vessels didn't even see each other until impact. Dozens were injured, a handful killed. One of the reports described survivors seeing ghostly lights bobbing in the water moments before the crash. Lanterns carried by no boat, extinguished instantly upon impact. Some called them warnings, others called them hallucinations. Tonight, Thomas wonders which one is worse. He shifts in his seat, trying to distract himself. A woman a few rows away clutches her handbag tightly, her knuckles pale. She mutters something under her breath, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a chant. He can't make out the words, but he recognizes tone. Someone who's been told the rules before and knows better than to laugh them off. The older man at the window suddenly jerks backward. His chair screeches across the floor, startling the silence out of the room. He gasps, staring at the fog pane as if something touched him through it. A handprint lingers there for a moment, slender, unfamiliar, and facing inward. Too high, too thin, too impossibly pressed against the glass for anyone outside to have left it. Then it vanishes, swallowed again by condensation. Passengers avert their eyes. No one speaks. The man stumbles to the center of the ferry, away from the windows, but the mark lingers in their collective memory like a scar. Thomas feels his pulse quicken, though a part of him knows how eerily calm the others are. It isn't shock, it's recognition. They've seen things like this before. They know what happens when the second rule is broken. The air grows colder, almost biting. He pulls his jacket tighter, but the chill isn't physical. It's the sensation of being watched, and not by the handful of silent commuters around him. Out there, somewhere in the fog, something feels aware of their passage. He thinks about an academic debate he once schemed in a philosophy forum. Do ghosts exist because people believe in them, or do people believe because ghosts exist? Tonight, that circular logic doesn't feel so abstract. If belief can bend the world, then every pair of nervous eyes on this ferry is shaping the fog into something living, something hungry. One man near the back finally breaks. He laughs too loud, too forced. "You all act like children," he scoffs, pulling a flask from his coat. He unscrews it with a theatrical flourish, takes a swig, and raises it in a mock toast. "To the Ghost Ferry!" The laugh dies quickly. From the upper deck, a hollow clang resounds like footsteps on metal grating. Heavy, deliberate, impossibly slow. They don't sound like crew. They sound like someone pacing, back and forth, measuring the ship. The man stiffens. He sets his flask down on the bench beside him, his hand trembling slightly, though his grin remains pasted in place. No one looks at him directly, but Thomas sees their eyes flick nervously in his direction. It reminds Thomas of another story his father once told. In the late 1942nd, a cousin had taken the ferry after a late shift. The crew swore the upper deck was empty, but passengers below heard boots pacing for the entire trip, never pausing, never stopping. When they docked, the noise ceased. The cousin disembarked, pale and shaking, swearing he'd seen shadows crossing the upper windows, though no one was assigned up there that night. Thomas exhales slowly, fighting the urge to bolt for the exit. But there is nowhere to go. The ferry is already adrift in an ocean of fog. He can't even see the water below, just white void, as though they're floating through sky instead of sea. The footsteps overhead fade, but the silence that replaces them feels worse. Everyone sits frozen, waiting for the next sound, the next test. The ferry hums, metal vibrating softly beneath their feet. Thomas feels it as much as hears it, a reminder that this ship isn't just steel and engine tonight. It is something more, something that carries rules along with passengers. And those rules aren't optional. He closes his eyes for a moment, whispering to himself that the fog is only weather, that the ferry is just transportation, that rules are just stories. But when he opens them again, the window across the cabin is no longer opaque. Through it, faintly, impossibly, he sees another ferry moving alongside them, silent, identical, with passengers that look just like theirs. Only these passengers aren't moving. Their faces are pale, blank, staring forward without blinking. And when Thomas blinks, the window fogs again, hiding everything. The air feels heavier now, thick with a dampness that clings to Thomas's lungs. Each breath tastes faintly metallic, like rust. He wipes his palms on his jeans, but the sweat won't go away. The ferry lurches suddenly, throwing several passengers sideways against the benches. A collective gasp escapes, but no alarm is sounded. No crew rushes in. The vessel simply steadies again, rocking gently as though nothing had happened. Thomas looks around, searching for reassurance, but everyone else remains rigid. Some clutch their bags, some close their eyes. Not one person speaks. The man with the flask stares at the floor, his grin gone, replaced by a grimace he can't mask. Then comes the third sound. A low groan vibrates through the hull, as though something massive is shifting against the side of the ferry. Not waves, not machinery, something alive. The sound crawls up through the metal, into the seats, into their bones. It's not the steady rhythm of footsteps anymore. It's weight, pressure, like something pressing its face against the hull. Listening, Thomas leans forward, his heart hammering. For a fleeting moment, he imagines the fog outside parting just enough to reveal a shape, something vast, clinging to the ferry like barnacles made of bone. He tells himself not to look. He remembers another rule he'd overheard once in a hushed voice. Never try to see what's in the fog. But the man with the flask doesn't listen. He stands abruptly, knocking the bottle over, amber liquid spilling across the floor. "It's just weather," he shouts, as if volume could rewrite reality. He strides toward the window, palm slamming against the glass. There's nothing out there. For one sickening heartbeat, Thomas almost believes him. The fog looks empty, endless. Then a shape glides past. It's faint, almost translucent, but unmistakable long fingers dragging across the outside of the glass, leaving streaks that don't fade. The man's bravado drinks instantly. He stumbles backward, tripping over the bench, eyes wide with horror. A hiss spreads through the cabin, not from mouths, but from the fog itself, seeping through the seams of the ferry, curling around their ankles. Cold, damp, suffocating. Passengers cover their mouths. One woman sobs quietly into her sleeve. The hiss lingers like laughter. Thomas clutches the edge of his seat, pulse pounding in his temples. This isn't just a ferry ride anymore, it's a test, a ritual, and someone has already failed. Somewhere deep inside the vessel, a bell tolls. Not the ferry horn, not a safety signal. This sound is old, metallic, hollow, and impossibly resonant. It echoes as if underwater, vibrating through their chests. The man with the flask falls to his knees. His eyes glaze, fixed on something no one else dares to see. Slowly, he begins to crawl toward the door that leads to the upper deck, the place no one should go. No one stops him. Not yet. The man with the flask doesn't look back. His knees scrape against the metal floor as he crawls toward the stairwell door, the hiss of the fog curling after him like a leash pulling him forward. Thomas feels the urge to call out, to tell him to stop. But the silence in the cabin is a warning. Breaking it will be like snapping a twig in a forest where predators listen for every sound. The door creaks open with a long, aching whine. A rush of fog spills inside, thick and pale, wrapping around the man's shoulders as if to welcome him. Then he disappears through the frame, swallowed by the stairwell. The door swings shut on its own, sealing the rest of them in. For a moment, there's nothing. No footsteps above, no shouting, no sound of struggle. Only the soft slap of waves against the ferry and that ever-present groan vibrating the hull. Thomas forces his mind to wander to something else, anything else, just to steady his breathing. He remembers reading about a ferry collision in 1901 when a Staten Island vessel struck another in thick fog. Dozens drowned before help could arrive, and the newspapers described the fog as a smothering blanket that trapped voices. That phrase comes back now, chillingly accurate. Then comes a new sound. Not groaning, not hissing, singing. It's faint at first, almost like a child humming in another room. The melody floats down through the ceiling, soft and sweet, and it takes Thomas a second to recognize it. A lullaby. Something old-fashioned, the kind his grandmother used to hum when she wanted him to nap. But the voice is wrong, too cold, too patient. The passengers stiffen. Some cover their ears. Others simply bow their heads lower, as though trying to disappear. Thomas swallows hard. He thinks of academic debates he's read, historians arguing over whether ghost ships are born from psychological stress in sailors or whether they're cultural projections of collective trauma. But sitting here, listening to that lullaby drip down like water through the ceiling, the explanations sound flimsy. The singing grows louder. And then, footsteps. Not the heavy ones from before. These are light, almost playful, pattering across the deck above, circling back and forth. Every creak of the wood sends a fresh pulse of fear through the cabin. The man with the flask hasn't returned. Someone finally whispers, breaking the silence. He's gone. They took him. The words hang in the air, heavy as lead. Thomas doesn't want to believe it. He tries to remind himself of true stories he's read, of people who disappeared in fog but were later found dazed on shore. Survivors who swore they'd follow phantom lights, phantom voices. Maybe the man with the flask just stepped off at the wrong time. Maybe he's wandering the deck in confusion. But then the lullaby cuts off. The silence that follows is worse. The door to the stairwell rattles violently, as if something is pushing against it. No one moves to open it. No one breathes. Then the rattling stops. A handprint smears across the glass window in the door. Too large to be human, the fingers stretch unnaturally long, leaving streaks like frost. It lingers for only a second before fading, as though the fog itself absorbed it back into his body. The passengers don't speak. They don't have to. The rules are written in the air now. Don't open the door. Don't go looking. Don't follow the sound. And yet, Thomas can't shake the certainty that this isn't over. If the fog wants one, it will take one. If the fog wants more, it won't stop here. He clutches the bench until his knuckles ache, staring at the stairwell. Somewhere above, something is still moving, circling, waiting. And Thomas knows, deep in his chest, that they are only halfway through the crossing. The ferry rocks gently, almost too gently, as if the water below is no longer the harbor but a vast, endless expanse without shore. Thomas feels the shift in his gut, a wrongness, like stepping into a room where all the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. He tells himself it's only the fog playing tricks on his senses, yet the weight of silence presses down heavier than before. The stairwell door remains shut. That ghostly handprint has dissolved, but the memory of it clings to every passenger's face. People sit rigid, backs pressed hard against the benches, as though distance alone could protect them. Thomas's gaze drifts toward the starboard windows. Beyond the glass, the fog churns. At first, it looks random, like clouds swirling in wind. Then he notices the patterns. Arcs, curves, looping circles that resemble letters. Like someone or something is writing on the fog itself. For a fleeting moment, he thinks he sees his own name forming there, stretched wide and trembling. Then it's gone, replaced by another, Olivia. He doesn't know who Olivia is, but a woman across the cabin suddenly gasps and clutches her chest. Don't look outside, someone hisses. Don't. Thomas turns his eyes down, but the temptation burns. It's always easier to look than not to look, isn't it? To distract himself, he recalls history. Staten Island ferries have run for over a century, and not every voyage was safe. In 1871, there was a fire on board the Westfield caused by a faulty boiler. Passengers leapt into the harbor to escape. Many never resurfaced. Accounts from survivors described how smoke clouded the air, turning day into night. Thomas wonders if tonight's fog is a cruel echo of that event, if memory itself can poison the air. But the strange event unfolding here isn't history. It's happening now. The cabin lights flicker. Once, twice. The bulbs hum. Then, for the briefest second, they die out completely. In that sliver of blackness, Thomas hears a sound so close to his ear that it makes his skin crawl. A whisper, a single word, his name. The lights snap back. Everyone looks around, bewildered, searching for the source. No one meets his eyes, no one admits to hearing it. Thomas rubs at his ear. He's reminded of debates he once skimmed in a late-night rabbit hole online. Psychologists arguing whether auditory hallucinations in stressful environments should be categorized as a form of self-protection or as the mind unraveling under pressure. Do whispers in the dark come from within or from outside? He doesn't know. All he knows is the ferry doesn't feel like it's moving anymore. Then, without warning, a figure stumbles back into the cabin through the portside door. Not the stairwell, but a door no one has seen open all night. It's the man with the flask. Or at least, it looks like him. His shirt is torn, slick, with something wet that doesn't glisten like blood. His eyes stare blankly ahead, pupils blown wide, irises milky. He walks stiffly, like a marionette tugged on strings, each step scraping the soles of his shoes against the floor. People recoil, clutching one another. The cabin holds its breath. He stops in the middle of the aisle, head tilting slightly, as if listening for something only he can hear. Then he raises his flask, but it's empty now. No liquid sloshes inside. He tips it back anyway, throat working in a dry swallow. The woman named Olivia, the one who gasped earlier, screams. It's not loud, but sharp enough to slice the silence. The man's head snaps toward her, too fast, neck bending at an unnatural angle. He begins to move. Thomas grabbed the edge of the bench, frozen. Part of him wants to shout, to warn her, but another part remembers the unspoken rule. Don't break the silence unless you're ready to be noticed. Someone else acts instead. A passenger near the back hurls a shoe, striking the man in the shoulder. The sound echoes in the metal chamber. The man stops. Slowly, his head swivels, fixing on the thrower. His body shudders. Then, without warning, he collapses flat to the ground, limbs splaying like a puppet with its strings cut. The shoe rolls away, bumping against Thomas's foot. The passengers sit paralyzed, no one daring to approach the body. Thomas can't look away from the stillness, waiting for a twitch, a sign of breath. Nothing. Then the lights flicker again. When they return, the body is gone. Only the flask remains upright on the floor, gleaming with condensation. The silence that follows is worse than any scream. And Thomas understands now, rules aren't enough. The fog doesn't just want obedience. It wants participation. It wants them to act, to engage, to slip up. He looks at the flask glistening on the floor and knows with cold certainty someone will reach for it. The flask sits there like bait. No one dares to move, yet the weight of his presence presses down harder with each second. Thomas feels the tension crawling up his spine, his skin prickling, as though the cabin itself is waiting to see who breaks first. The ferry hums faintly, its engines groaning beneath the deck. But the sound no longer feels steady. It rises and falls like a heartbeat, on the verge of collapse. A man in a navy suit finally stands. His hands tremble, but his voice is steady enough when he says, "We can't just leave it there. Someone has to." But the others snap back. A chorus of terrified whispers. "Sit down. Don't touch it. Don't you dare." The rule is clear. Though no one wrote it down, what appears in the fog does not belong to the living. The suited man falters, lowering his hand, and Thomas lets out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. To distract himself from the dread coiling inside his chest, Thomas thinks of history again. The Staten Island ferry hasn't only carried workers and tourists, it carried soldiers too. During World War II, ferries transported troops across the harbor. Some never returned. The foggy waters of New York were once patrolled for submarines, and sailors swore they sometimes saw shapes in the mist that weren't on the charts. Perhaps the harbor remembers, Thomas thinks. Perhaps memory lingers in water longer than in stone. But then, the strange event intrudes again. The fog outside thickens, wrapping the ferry so completely that the windows reflect only the interior of the cabin. Yet Thomas notices one reflection doesn't quite line up. A woman near the corner of the bench, her body is still, but in the glass. Her reflection moves differently. It blinks when she doesn't. Its lips curl into a smile she never makes. Thomas grips the seat until his knuckles ache. He wants to shout, to warn her, but he remembers the rule: don't draw attention. The reflection turns his head, not toward her, toward him. He snaps his eyes shut, heart hammering. When he opens them again, the window is just a window. A debate he once read surfaces in his mind. Scientists arguing whether mirrors and reflections are psychological triggers for pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, or whether they are portals to something more. Do ghosts really exist? The article asked. Or are they the brain's desperate attempt to impose sense on chaos? Sitting here, Thomas knows that no brain could invent what he just saw. The cabin grows colder, breath fogs the air, and the ferry's heating system rattles as though choked. People huddle closer together, the silence heavier than ever. And then a true story breaks free from Thomas's memory. He once heard about a Staten Island commuter, a man named Richard who disappeared on a foggy night in the 1982nd. He boarded the ferry as usual, his MetroCard swipe recorded, but never disembarked. No body, no trace. The papers ran with theories. He jumped, he staged his vanishing, he'd been mugged and tossed overboard. But the whispers that locals still pass down suggest otherwise, that he walked into the fog when they called his name. And now Thomas wonders, had he just seen Richard's fate play out again in the moving reflection? A sudden sound interrupts his thoughts. A soft clink. Everyone's eyes whip toward the center of the cabin. The flask has tipped over on its own. Its cap unscrews with a lazy spin. Liquid spills out. Except it isn't liquid. It's thicker, darker, rolling across the floor with a mind of its own, winding in patterns that mimic the fog outside. Letters again, names again. Thomas's name. His stomach drops. He can feel every eye on him. Passengers pulling slightly away, as if distance could save them from being next. The pseudo-man shakes his head violently. Don't respond. Don't acknowledge it. His words are brittle, as though he's reciting from some half-remembered rule. But Thomas feels the pull, a magnetic hunger dragging him forward. He grips the bench until his nails dig into the wood. The ferry lurches suddenly, violently. Passengers cry out, clutching at seats. The lights flare, buzzing, and for one dizzy moment, Thomas swears the cabin stretches long and endless, like a hallway of mirrors, rows of passengers multiplying, their faces all turning toward him, waiting. Then, just as abruptly, everything steadies. The flask is gone. The floor is dry. But Thomas knows better. The fog doesn't take things away. It hides them. It waits. And for the first time since the journey began, Thomas realizes the rules are shifting. It isn't just about staying silent or not looking outside. The rules are alive, rewriting themselves with each mistake the passengers make. And he has already been named. The fog presses closer, thick as wool, so dense that even the humming of the ferry's engines feels muted. Swallow whole. Thomas stares at the empty spot where the flask had been only moments ago, his heart still pounding in uneven bursts. He doesn't speak, but inside, his thoughts churn with the weight of inevitability. He's been marked. The passengers seem to know it too. They won't look directly at him. They avert their eyes like children pretending a monster isn't standing in the corner. No one offers comfort. No one even whispers. Thomas tries to anchor himself by remembering history again. The Staten Island ferry, after all, has seen darker days. He recalls reading about the 1901 accident when two ferries collided in thick fog, killing dozens. Survivors describe the air as alive with screams and shadows. One woman swore she saw hands reaching from the water, pulling passengers down. Official records dismissed her as hysterical. Yet her story still drifts around the harbor like a restless spirit passed quietly from generation to generation. The thought doesn't comfort him, it feels like a premonition. Then the strange event begins. The ferry slows. There's no announcement, no explanation. The engine's hum dwindles to silence. The passengers freeze, every head turning toward the windows. The fog outside shifts, not randomly, but with purpose. It curls in spirals, then unfurls, revealing shapes. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Figures standing on the water. Men in tattered suits, women in dresses that ripple like seaweed. Some clutch briefcases, others cradle children who don't move. Their eyes are pale and glowing, and their faces are solemn, expectant. They don't walk, they don't breathe, they wait. Thomas's throat closes up. The others clutch one another, but no one screams. They know better. The ferry doesn't move forward. It drifts, caught between the shore it left behind and the unseen shore ahead. A whisper threads through the cabin, though no one has spoken. One must leave so the rest may arrive. Thomas shudders, because he knows the truth. The ferry isn't just transportation tonight. It's a bargaining ground. The fog has chosen him. An old man in the corner mutters shakily. This is how it always goes, one for the many. Always one. His words break the fragile silence, and suddenly Thomas remembers a true story. It was told once at a Staten Island bar about a commuter named Janet who never made it home in 1975. Witnesses swore she was there, laughing, minutes before departure. Yet, when the ferry docked, she was gone. No splash, no scream. The official report marked her as missing, presumed drowned. But those who knew better whispered of the fog's demand. Janet had been taken, and because of her, the others made it home. Thomas feels the eyes of the figures outside, sees their outlines shimmering faintly through the cabin glass. He tries to argue with himself, maybe this is all stress, maybe the brain does conjure patterns in chaos, like scientists say. Do ghosts really exist? He asks himself in desperation. Or do we create them because we're too afraid to face randomness? But then the fog curls inward into the cabin itself. Cold tendrils slither across the floor, wrapping around Thomas's feet. They don't touch anyone else, just him. He doesn't resist. He can't add. The passengers still won't look at him, but their silence is heavier than screams. They are complicit in his fate. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Survival demands sacrifice, and everyone knows it. As the fog lifts him slowly from the bench, his body weightless, Thomas's mind races with the rules. They were never meant to save everyone. They were meant to save most. He finally understands. The rules aren't warnings, they're negotiations. The ferry shudders once. The figures outside vanish, and the fog thins just enough for the lights of Staten Island to glow faintly ahead. The engines roar back to life, steady and strong, as though nothing had happened. The passengers exhale collectively, relief blooming in the silence. No one speaks of Thomas. No one dares. By the time the ferry docks, there's no trace he ever existed. The benches are empty. The passengers file off in tired, solemn silence, clinging to their second chance at life. But as the last of them steps onto the pier, a single rule whispers on the wind, carried across the harbor. If the fog writes your name, you must not resist. Someone always pays the fare. And tonight, it was Thomas.